Welcome to Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm your host, Greg Bluestein, with the other host, Patricia Murphy. And we want to start today's episode off on a somber note, unfortunately. We just got the news, Patricia, that Martha Zoller, our friend, and also the conservative analyst, pundit, commentator, Georgia Gang co-host, you name it, she passed away on Monday. And I know that we went up and were part of what became her last radio show on Friday. She invited us up there because she was planning a retirement. And it ended up being her final show. But it was great for us to at least be able to say goodbye in our own way, unknowingly.
Yeah, it really is it's the kind of news that you get and you can't quite believe it because although Martha had some heart problems in the past, we just saw her. I talked to her on Sunday, and she was upbeat. She was happy. She was excited about what's ahead. And to me, I think that is what makes this news just so incredibly sad and tragic, is that she had so many plans for when she was done with her show. She had taken the steps to wrap up her show, to stay involved, but also have more time for her family and her grandchildren and to do things she also wanted to do. And so I just hate it. I just hate it for her. I hate it for her family. I'm really grateful that we got to see her because you don't often get a chance to know that a chapter is ending for somebody and to tell them how much they matter to you and to tell them how much you admire them. And one quality that Martha had is that she did do that with people a lot, even when it wasn't an official goodbye or an official end of something. She would end a lot of phone calls with, "You're just such a good friend. I'm so grateful for our friendship." And I've really tried to internalize that lesson from her before. And now I think it's a lesson I'll always carry with me.
And you said something very touching on her show on WDUN on Friday as we closed out that chapter and that show. You mentioned how there's so few working moms in Georgia politics and how she was something of a role model for you as you navigated that same lane.
Yeah, for me and for a lot of other women. I think people were surprised to know that Martha and I were close because she is a conservative radio host, very dedicated to conservative causes. I'm not. And so I think people are like, "Oh, you guys are friends." I'm like, "Oh, we're such good friends," because we did talk about family a lot. And I just really took a lot of strength from her example to see her navigating her way through a very successful career, doing things she really cared about and believed in. But then also she had 5 kids with her husband, Lynn, grandchildren, and who she adored. And so she made room in her life for all of those things. And it seems impossible unless you see somebody else doing it as a firsthand example.
Yeah. Well, Martha Zoller, may she rest in peace. May her memory be a blessing. I know that we'll never forget her and her legacy. Well, she would want us to talk about what's happening in Georgia politics because that is what she did nonstop, whether she was on the air, on social media, or calling folks like us all the time saying, what is going on down there?
Not just her day job.
Exactly. And we will tell you what is going on down there because we're here in the state capitol right now for the final throes of this strange legislative special session that has gone from what we thought would be a giant battle over redistricting to something very different: property taxes. Republicans had the votes to pass their property tax plan, just not enough of them.
Shocking. The yeas are 33, the nays are 18, and this bill has failed.
So the Georgia legislature came back for a special session that almost nobody wanted. The official reason was that looming election problem. Georgia had a deadline to get rid of QR code vote counting. Lawmakers had not settled out on a replacement system in time for the midterms. There was also that looming battle over redistricting. But by Saturday, the story under the Gold Dome had shifted. Republicans tried to move dozens of local bills that would let voters in cities and counties raise sales taxes by a penny in exchange for lowering or potentially eliminating city and county property taxes on homes. The idea is central to House Speaker John Byrne's push for property tax relief. It's also central to the overall Republican argument for tax relief in November. But those bills needed a 2/3 vote. Republicans do not have enough to get there alone, so they needed Democrats. And Democrats said no, Patricia. this was an example of Democrats using what little leverage they have in a very effective way.
Yeah. And I do think that Democrats are going to come out of this session saying, wow, we made a difference and there might be a lot more of this to come. There was a majority for this to pass, but not a 2/3. And that's because it needed that 2/3 threshold in order to go before voters as a referendum. And I think that this has always been the tension in this property tax relief and any property tax relief also, anyway, is that in order to reduce property taxes, which is the main source of income for local governments, because those local governments still have their bills coming in, they still have their financial obligations, they're going to need to raise revenue somewhere. And so the suggestion in this bill is to let voters decide whether you do that with a 1% increase in the sales tax. Now, Democrats are arguing, you know what, you're not reducing anybody's taxes, you're just shifting the tax burden. I do think it's important for voters to know that, oh, I'm not getting rid of all my taxes, I'm just maybe paying it in a different form. Of course, if you're not a property owner, the idea of swapping property taxes for sales tax increase is less attractive. People are desperate for that property tax relief, but this has a way of shifting that burden either to the same people or to other people in a way that Democrats had an objection to. And this is the inherent problem, the inherent challenge of reducing property taxes in the first place. My quick question for you, Greg, the House did pass property tax relief and the Senate did as well. There was a property tax bill that came out of the last session of the General Assembly. How does this interact with that?
Yeah, this would speed up the implementation of it. This would also put referenda on the ballot in November. So it could help Republicans juice up.
This November.
Yes. So basically, there was a number of cities and counties that said, hey, if we're going to do this, we want to start reaping the benefits from it earlier. And then, it becomes sort of if a couple counties and cities call for it, then others feel like they're being left out if they don't. If a county calls for it, but a city doesn't call for it, there's a worry there too. So once a county called for it, a lot of their cities within the county called for it. So anyway, it became this sort of quieter MO among Republicans who did not want to be here, saying, look, if we're going to get dragged back to a special session that no one really wants over these QR codes and over redistricting, we might as well get something for our local officials out of it. So it became that argument. Democrats had a very, very different argument. They argued that don't call this tax relief if it raises sales taxes. Here's Representative Sam Park. He's one of the House minority leaders.
Democrats believe in no new taxes. No new taxes. My Republican colleagues continue to assert that they're trying to provide hundreds of millions of dollars of relief for property tax relief by increasing sales taxes. Democrats believe that to address the affordability crisis, you do not do that by increasing taxes.
Right.
State Representative Tanya Miller, she's the Democratic nominee for Attorney General as well. She went a step further, calling the Republican plan a bait and switch.
The no vote today is a vote for no new taxes on diapers, no taxes on baby formula, no taxes on household goods, no taxes on the things that working families rely on and need to survive in their daily lives, no taxes on school supplies, no taxes on school clothes. We are down here fighting for the affordability of life for the people in Georgia, and we will not, under the pressure of this special session, allow Republicans to come down here with a bait and switch, with a new sales tax for you.
Republicans tried to frame those votes as Democrats blocking tax relief for homeowners who are already struggling with rising assessments. Here's House Ways and Means Chairman Shaw Blackman.
Republicans have continued to offer opportunities at relief, and sadly, Democrats have now twice blocked and denied their own voters across this state a chance at meaningful tax relief.
So, Patricia, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see the narratives forming on either side of the party aisle. Democrats saying Republicans are trying to raise your sales taxes. Republicans saying Democrats are trying to block property tax relief. And, both can be true at the same time, and both also can hinge on how effective it is for these candidates and their party leaders to get those messages out this November.
It's really remarkable to hear the Democratic leader, Sam Park, say Democrats believe in no new taxes. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard a Democrat say that before. It certainly gives them the talking point that they want right now to take to voters during what is an affordability crisis for many people, unless you're deeply invested in this current stock market. And that is a message that they are very happy to take to voters. And that's a soundbite they'll be very happy to play over and over again. It almost feels like the text of a mailer. Now, in contrast, what Shaw Blackman was saying is also true. And as you said, these both can be true at the same time. That really is what politics is all about, to be honest with you, that people are just clamoring, begging for property tax relief in Georgia because as those property values have gone up, first of all, it's very hard to move anywhere because the values have gotten so much, it's hard to buy something that's not more expensive than where you're currently living, but then your property taxes go up in the process. So you can I know that they are hearing from their voters everywhere they go, you've got to help me with property taxes. They're hearing that in all of these events. And, I guess another piece of politics, you can go back to your voters and say, well, we tried to do it. And they did. They've really got to, at some point, come together and work out a solution on this because the local governments are also going to the Republican leaders and saying, hey, you guys can figure it out, but we're going to need some source of revenue if we're not going to have to cut city services, especially in these smaller cities and towns. They are always on the margins, and any reduction in revenue that they weren't planning on is going to force them to make significant reductions in things that are not full of bells and whistles in the first place.
And that speaks to the broader debate, too, that we had earlier this year during the normal session, where property taxes were like really an undercurrent throughout the entire session. House leaders wanted to go further than the legislation that ultimately passed. They kind of swallowed it at the end, saying, okay, it's something. Democrats said basically that they were worried about the aftershocks of this legislation. They also were worried because it originated from the Senate, not the House, and these sort of tax measures must originate from the House. So we could be seeing litigation over that sometime later this year, this summer even. So stay tuned for that. But Patricia, right now we're seeing Democrats flex whatever muscle they have. And, on Monday as well, House and Senate Democrats rejected the comeback attempt for this local legislation. Democrats don't have that many cards to play. They're in the minority. But every time there's something that requires 2/3 of the vote, that's when they can wield their power. And in this case, they're using it to block these measures.
Yeah, I do think also this has given them an opportunity to have a high profile win by defeating something like this on their terms in a way that they have really struggled in the past to find their moments that felt like a good opportunity for the Democratic Party. We have seen them in the past take very high-profile stances on issues about transgender legislation, and then some of the Democrats even said, "Why did we just do that? Did we not just give Republicans a huge issue to hit us over the head with in November?" Certainly, some Democrats thought it was the right thing. A lot of Democrats thought it was the wrong thing to do, to take that stand, to walk en masse out of the House when transgender legislation came to the floor. In this case, every Democrat agrees affordability is the issue. Every Democrat agrees this is a moment that we can flex our muscles. And when you're actually successful in the process, that's the equation that they're looking for. So in retrospect, this special session will go down as one where they feel like they got a little wind beneath their wings, if you will. Got some momentum going into November that they're going to be very pleased with.
Yeah, and add to that the news at the beginning of the session that redistricting would at least be shelved for another to a later date. Okay, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the other piece of this special session that's still pending, the election bill, the QR code deadline, and why that fight made the property tax showdown even more combustible. This is Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Welcome back to Politically Georgia. I'm Greg Bluestein here with Patricia Murphy. A reminder, if you've got a question you'd like to ask us here on Politically Georgia, you can call the hotline anytime, day or night. Leave your question. We'll play it back and answer it right here on the show during our Monday mailbag segment. That number is 770-810-5297, politicallygeorgia@ajc.com. You can call that number, you can email, you can text us, no matter when, what, where. Shani B., our executive producer, will be standing by. Okay, we're talking about Georgia's special legislative session, which started with a voting system problem, but quickly turned into a broader fight over taxes, over trust, over power. Let's step back and explain the election issue, Patricia, because this is what led us here in the first place. Without the election issue, you wouldn't have a special session. You wouldn't have had a debate over taxes or over redistricting at all. In 2024, lawmakers set a July 2026 deadline to remove QR codes from Georgia ballots, but the legislature ended its regular session back in April without resolving how that would work for this year's midterms. So they were stuck in this quandary. Do they have a special session to revisit it? Do they let the courts decide? Do they just pretend nothing happened?
Everything's fine.
Everything's fine. And you also couldn't call the special session during the May primaries or during the June runoffs because candidates wanted to be out there going and campaigning and doing their thing. So that's why you had a session that started the Wednesday after the runoffs, a post-runoff hangover mixed with a session that most people, I mean, there are some ornery lawmakers out there that created the possibility of confusion, even legal challenges over how votes would be counted this fall. So Kemp calls the special session. The Senate passed a bill in its chambers over the weekend, delaying the QR code ban until January 2028. But the Senate version also added a requirement for hand recounts of the top two races on the ballot. That created its own fight. So basically, Patricia, we still have this battle over QR codes, and QR codes aren't beloved by, there's a lot of Republicans who don't trust them, partly some MAGA loyalists who agree with Trump's false claims, his lies about widespread election fraud. But there's also technical reasons why there are a lot of Republicans who don't like QR codes. There are also a lot of Democrats, let's be clear, who do not love the system we have now. The question is, do we do a massive overhaul right now in the middle of a special session? Or do we wait until next year when there's a new governor, a new secretary of state, a whole new batch of lawmakers?
Well, they were not able to resolve this in the 40-day session. It certainly does not feel like they're going to be able to resolve this to find an entirely new voting system in this special session. We're already several days into this session, and you can feel the pressure for them to recess and get out of here. And in the meantime, they are hearing from election directors. When I say they, all members are hearing from election directors saying, we cannot change voting systems between now and November. Train our people. First of all, decide the system, buy the system, deliver the system, train the people, train the voters. That is an unbelievably time-consuming, complicated thing to do. So it does feel like this time extension, kicking the can down the road. I mean, that sounds negative. Delaying this decision for another day when they have more time to have a good, thorough debate and conversation about it seems like the direction this is going. The idea to add a hand recount of the top two races is very much responsive to activists who often disagree significantly with election directors or never talk to election directors. And I think there are some constitutional concerns with hand counting just the top two races. Also some logistical concerns with hand counting the top two races and what happens after that. The legislation is very unclear about, okay, you've done a recount. Now, what do you do with your recount? What if it's different? The language just simply doesn't address that. So it feels like that piece of legislation is in trouble as well. Logic is not always what wins the day down here, but logic would dictate that they extend the deadline for our current systems and have a robust debate once we have a new legislature and new statewide officials in place. And that would be in 2028.
So Patricia, let's do you're exactly, 2027, but it would be before 2028.
Yes.
Let's pull back the curtains here too, because I get to the special session I took on for the team on a Saturday morning.
You get a gold star, Greg. I did not.
That's okay. You didn't miss anything. But when I showed up right around the time when the Senate was gaveling in, there might have been 2 or 3 Republicans in the room and pretty much most, if not all, Democrats. And the reason why is Republicans were having a sort of a knockdown, drag out, behind the scenes debate over what they would do, because Republicans feel like they have to have something to take home to the base.
You gotta have something to take back,
which really does, And I was later on that day, I was at a Republican event down in Perry, and it was the talk of the event. There is such distrust of the QR codes, of the current system, of anything that has Brad Raffensperger's imprint on it, and he's been a defender of the current system. So there was a sense that Republicans had to do something. So there was a divide behind the scenes in the Senate caucus meeting, and they came out with legislation that would, yes, as you mentioned, kick the can, because that's what it is. They kick the can to move the deadline back to 2028, but also include those hand tallies. If the vote is not quote unquote correct, whatever that means, there'd be a hand tally of those top two races for governor and Senate. That is also raised a lot of questions. As you noted, what is a correct system? What would be the remedy? Would this breed even more voter confusion, distrust of the system? Would this backfire? Could these hand counts last days? And, we could be in this weird limbo that we know we were in a sense in 2020 as we were waiting for the Biden vote counts. Knowing the longer it takes, the more mistrust and conspiracy theories bubble up. This is what Democrats said about that issue. Senator Jai Howard, he's new, but he sure is on the well a lot.
He sure is.
He argues that Democrats were shut out of the entire process.
The Democrats were only allowed to see the bill like the moment they walked into committee, where there was a small group of men for weeks hammering out the details well before that. And now in a matter of a couple of days, here it is on the Senate floor with no debate, using the rules of the Senate to make sure that we depress debate instead of having real substantive debate.
These complaints got even sharper during the Senate debate. Here's Democratic Senator Randall Mangum.
This morning I heard that 5 white men admittedly got behind closed doors and created a deal for us to vote on, and would not even allow the committee to do one amendment.
Patricia, this is where it got really interesting too, because you can see the new power structure in the Georgia Senate. You would expect Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones to be front and center in these types of things up until about last week. He was the one leading the charge, setting the policy, setting the agenda, because he was not only the president of the state Senate, but also one of the leading contenders for governor. And after his loss last week, he was kind of up there just waiting to see what his own caucus was doing. And he kind of even made a joke like how soon they forget, right? He was asked about it, and in an aside, he kind of joked, like, what am I, chopped liver essentially? He has come out though in support of what the Republican Senate leaders came out with, this idea for the hand recount. And that's really where Greg Dolezal steps in, because Greg Dolezal is now the leading Republican in the Georgia Senate because he is the GOP nominee for lieutenant governor. So you could see behind the scenes and in front of our very eyes, him flexing his policy muscles. I'm the guy now. Go along with me.
You can almost see the crown like being moved from one head to another in this whole process. The shifting power dynamics in the last week have been completely wild to watch. This is a perfect example. And it has to be said that Greg Dolezal was a state senator at the time who supported President Trump's efforts to recall the Georgia State Senate and Legislature to overturn Georgia's election results. He was a big part of the Stop the Steal crowd. He doesn't call it that. He won't call it that, but he certainly was an ally to President Trump at the time and is very, very close with Republican activists who are pushing to overhaul the election system and who have a lot of doubts and a lot of skepticism and occasionally conspiracies about the election system. So now that the crown has moved to Greg Dolezal, his imprint is on here very, very importantly and significantly. And you can also feel the shifting power dynamics between the state House and the state Senate. There was sort of a tug of war of power of who makes the final decisions here. It feels like the state Senate is in its own it's not quite chaotic, but it is in so much flux. It feels like the House Speaker is stepping forward to make the final decisions on a lot of what's happening down here at the Capitol during this special session. Also, Governor Kemp is practically absent from all of these conversations as well. So it leaves Speaker Burns as the lone, the last man standing of the previous power structure, who now has the organization and the votes behind him to make the final decisions on this. And I'll be interested to see the role that he plays in getting to a final yes or no on this conversation about a hand recount.
That's a good point. The governor has not really pronounced anything publicly about where he wants to see legislation going. He's said he was disappointed that redistricting is off the table, but he said, look, I can only ask them to come and vote on it. I can't make them do so. And then when it comes to Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, one of his allies was like, he is a double lame duck. Not only is he a lame duck lieutenant governor, but now he is no longer the GOP in GOP running for governor. So he is sort of biding out his time. Well, that is where things stand right now, Patricia. I know we will be watching very closely over the next couple of days, and of course, the aftermath of this special session. That's going to do it for today's edition of Politically Georgia. If you found us on YouTube, welcome to our channel. Please click the subscribe button so you never miss an episode or miss seeing us on video. You can also follow the Politically Georgia podcast, your traditional means, Apple, Spotify, or any podcast platform. Wherever you're listening, we always appreciate your comments, ratings, and reviews. We'll talk to you next time on Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thanks for listening to the Politically Georgia podcast. Our executive producer is Shane Backler. AJC's head of audio is Sam Stamler. Production support from our partners at Goat Rodeo, including Kara Schillen, Hazel Hoffman, and Max Johnston. For more of our political coverage, visit ajc.com/politicallygeorgia, and we invite you to support local journalism by subscribing to the AJC. Join us again next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.